Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction. So today I will talk about energy maps for future large-scale mobile wireless networks. And these energy maps are a specific example of quality of service maps that we'd like to construct in general. So, and I'll talk about other maps such as for delay and so on at the end. This is joint work with my first PhD graduate. I graduated my first student in November, so Min-Kyung Park, and her PhD dissertation is online. So the material that I cover here is chapters 3 and 4 of her thesis. And it's also an ICC paper that's coming up in Glasgow. And you can find those on our webpage. So I'd like to begin by describing two paradigms that we currently have in networks. So the first paradigm is wireless sensor networks. And here's a prototypical example with a collection site in the middle of the deployment region and many sensor microprocessor nodes that are distributed around it, usually randomly. And these nodes, by using localized algorithms such as enclosure and others, can find nearest neighbor links and establish communication to the collection site. Then they collect data such as temperature and so on from the environment, and they can relay this all the way to the collection site through the network. So this is a sensor network example. In these kinds of networks, energy is considered severely limited and is of paramount importance. And this is what a lot of the protocols are designed for. And some of the recent work in the past 5 years that have been done in this area, examples for routing protocols are directed diffusion, EASE and Glider and others. MAC protocols, SMAC probably being the most important here. A lot of them use sleep schedules to put the nodes to sleep to conserve energy. In terms of implementation, today we have modes. It originally started out with Berkeley and Rene modes. Crossbow is a commercialized is the commercialized version, the company, and you can buy these modes for $100 this size. So operating systems, TinyOS is the one that was first designed for these types of networks. There's a lot of research going on in network data aggregation. Because sensors are observing correlated events, you can actually compress the data and send it through the network. There's a lot of research that is currently done in this area. So this is one paradigm that we have today in terms of research. Another paradigm that a lot of researchers have worked on is mobile wireless networks. And these are ad hoc networks typically, but they can be hybrid networks as well with gateways into the wired infrastructure. So here's, again, a network. And the key thing here that is different is that the nodes are now mobile. In the first paradigm, the nodes were stationary. That's the typical research environment that is for the first paradigm. And so if this gateway is not here, it's purely ad hoc. If the gateway is there, then it's a hybrid network. In these networks, throughput and delay are considered key measures. And usually, nodes are not modeled as energy limited. So these mobile ad hoc networks, some of the research that's done, routing protocols, a lot of work on proactive routing and reactive routing, geographic routing more recently. MAC protocols are typically CSMA-CA based, and some examples. Topology control, because the nodes are changing location, you'd like to keep track of them. You'd like to keep track of your neighbors in a localized fashion. And so this is the second paradigm that we have today. And one of the key things here is that so far, researchers have considered paths as sequences of nodes. And so if I want to reach from here to here, I go through that sequence of nodes to reach the gateway. And we'll see that that is not the only way to model it. And we'll see how we can model it in other ways. So given those two current paradigms, we can think about, well, what will the future look like? So 10 years from now, what kind of networks can we expect? So here's one vision, the one possible vision. So first of all, there's a lot of work that is being done today in embedded systems development. And typically, we're looking at sensor microprocessor devices that are being developed. So Nike, for example, has a product out. It's a shoe with a little hole, and you can put the pebble there. It's actually, the pebble is a wireless device, and it can it's sensor in the sense that it can collect your running statistics. So the distance you have run, your speed, instantaneous speed, it can compute the average speed. So all of those are done by that little pebble. It has a wireless connection to an iPod. Nike actually teamed up with Apple. That is on your arm, and it can wirelessly transmit and display the statistics here. And you can, so that's one of the technologies that's already in the market. So we'll find that there are a lot of sensor technologies that are being developed. For example, for transportation networks, a lot of research groups are working on cars and collision avoidance mechanisms. So you put sensors on the bumpers, and before you bump into the other car, it actually puts on the brakes itself when it detects that the other car is you're about to hit the other car. So these things are being developed. We expect buses to be, for example, very wirelessly connected in the future. So we imagine a future with lots of sensor communicator devices swarming around. So and information will flow through these devices. That's one vision that we might develop. So also the distinction between sensor networks and ad hoc networks, which are two separate paradigms today, will largely blur because the sensor nodes mounted in cars, shoes, and so on will be mobile devices as well. So they will not be stationary. So we can visualize a future with these sensor, microprocessor, and actuator devices that actually do something as well to the environment. There is a lot of work being done today on convergence of control, sensing, as well as processing. So these are the devices of tomorrow. That's how we imagine them. So if we turn to today's mobile networks, which we can take as a starting point, we find that the quality of service has been a big issue. It's a big challenge in mobile networks. And the main problem is that when all the nodes are moving around, quality of service guarantees are extremely hard to give. And one of the underlying assumptions there, if you look at the research though, is that network paths have been considered as sequences of nodes. So when a node changes location, that path is considered gone. And you have to either repair or reinitiate or reconstruct the path. And this is actually one of the key problems regarding mobile networks. Researchers currently see node mobility, individual node mobility, as the main limitation to how well you can actually track quality of service in these networks. So I'll show that that's actually not necessarily true. And this is the main idea of this work. So let's look at an example where I'm trying to transmit from a source location XY to a gateway located here through a mobile network. And at this, let's say that in this initially, I have nodes A and B. Now, if node A moves up there, current research basically says that if you look at reactive or proactive routing protocols, it says that that path is gone. Okay, you have to do route discovery to discover that path and so on. But the main insight is that if that A goes away, if another C replaces it, in terms of end-to-end quality of service, yes, thank you. In terms of end-to-end quality of service, nothing has changed from the standpoint of this node. So the main insight is that I do not care who relays the traffic, and the nodes actually there are interchangeable. Okay? So the energy consumption, for example, from this point to this point has not changed as long as this node has been replaced. And so to generalize this slightly, we can say the following. If this is the destination collection site or base station, we imagine this to be stationary, and this is the source location, if the current, let's say, minimum energy path is through this, the shown one here, now if this flock of nodes moves in this direction, and another flock of nodes comes in, then the constructed path will be roughly the same. So in other words, as long as the node density in between remains roughly the same, the end-to-end energy consumption will also be roughly the same. The nodes will have changed, but the nodes are like indistinguishable particles from the perspective of this location. So that's really the main insight here. So the idea will be to try to construct spatial maps of these energy metrics, taking into account that the nodes are interchangeable. So here's another example of the scenarios. Here's the mobile network. At this instance, this is the constructed minimum energy path. Here the nodes have changed, and this is the path. And we will show that the difference between the energy, end-to-end energy consumption between here and here is actually not that different. Yes? Yeah, so in this case, yes, they do have energy constraints, but not to the point where you will have to do balancing of the load. So here we do not consider any load balancing. We just focus on the minimum energy path as a starting point.
Yeah, but if one of these nodes is replacing the other node which has less energy.
That's right. So that will be a further thing, but it's not included in the first model. So here we assume that energy is important to minimize, but we do it sort of on a path basis. Okay, I know that there's a way, so you can say that this node actually has less energy than others. Then we can do balancing, but that would be sort of a second order model. It's not modeled here. So the main idea that we came up with is the following. So we can separate mobility based on what I discussed so far into two components. One is the individual node mobility, which is what researchers have considered so far to be the main limitation. And the second one is a coherence time of the quality of service metrics. So in this case, our quality of service metric is the end-to-end energy consumption. So as I showed before, even though you may have very high node mobility underneath, the end-to-end energy consumption may stay roughly invariant as long as the node density in between remains the same. Therefore, we can talk about the separate coherence time of that QoS metric, which is different from individual node mobility. Now, it will take some time to actually spread this kind of energy map information to the network, which we call the spreading period. But if that spreading period is much smaller than the coherence time, in other words, the time interval over which the energy changes from a source location to the destination, then we actually can have a network that is tractable, whose QoS metrics are tractable. So this is an analogy with the point-to-point wireless links, where if we have a point-to-point wireless channel, if the symbol duration is much less than the coherence time of the wireless channel, then we can actually track that the channel state. And in analogy, we're saying that for networks, if the coherence time is much larger for QoS metrics end-to-end is much larger than the spreading period, the time required to spread that information, then we have a network whose QoS is tractable.
So, and
yes.
It seems like implicit is the idea that sort of as the nodes change, right, finding the route through the new nodes
yes.
Isn't very expensive.
That's right. That's an implicit assumption, yes.
So how, are you going to tell us why it's not expensive?
Yeah, so for, yes.
The route breaks and you have to start doing.
That's right. So I think that's that's true for reactive and proactive routing protocols. But if you look at geographic routing, for example, the decisions are made in a completely localized manner. So if in this case, we assume that you do have your position information, okay, so in this work. Yeah.
You're going to use geography.
Yeah, that's one way to do the routing towards the destination. That's right. So it's localized and it's not very expensive in that case. Yeah.
But that's something, I think, the trajectory-based forwarding.
Yes. Yeah, so I will explain the difference. So in trajectory-based forwarding, routes are also considered as routes through space, but there is no notion of quality of service metrics. In other words, there is no link between routes through space and quality of service metrics, and this is what we will develop in this talk. Yeah. So in order to develop these notions, we will look at use some mobility models. And our starting point is a very simple mobility model, a widely used one, the random waypoints model. And let me briefly describe the model. So in this model, the initial location of a node is picked uniformly and randomly from this deployment region. Then the first destination of the node is also picked randomly, uniformly. And the node moves there with a velocity that is random between Vmin and Vmax. Once it gets to this destination, then it picks its next destination the same way, uniformly over the area, and moves there with a random pick velocity, and so on and so forth, this way. So if every node executes this in the network independently of the others, then we get the random waypoints model. Okay, it's a widely used model for simulations. So one of the interesting results that papers that came out in around 2003 was this paper by Bedstetter, which actually won a Best Paper Awards. And they actually derived analytically the node density distribution of the random waypoints model. And they showed that it has this shape. And so why is it peaking in the middle? Because in that model, so here there are many nodes that are executing what I showed you before, because the node crosses the middle area much more than the edges, right, under this model. So you expect it to actually peak around the middle and go to 0 at the edges, and that's what happens. They actually derived analytically the exact form of this. And yes?
Is that because of that square assumption? If you have, for example, circular area, so you are...
It will still peak in the middle. You can have because the reason it peaks in the middle is that once you pick a destination, most of the time you're still falling in the middle of the deployment region. Yeah, so, and in the circle assumption, the 0 would be around on the boundary again of the circle, but peak would be in the middle. So they actually did this. So now what we did is the following. We deployed a base station to the middle of the deployment region. So we still have this mobile network around it. And from every location, we measured in the simulation the energy that it takes to get through the minimum energy path to the base station. So from every source location. And we averaged this over 10,000 runs. So the way this is done is the following. So we actually divide the deployment into a grid. And the nodes are moving according to the random waypoints model. When they visit a particular cell, they actually record the minimum energy measurement to get there. This is done for simulation purposes globally. And then we collect all the measurements that are taken for different cells, and we average those. So when you average those, you actually get this energy cup shape. So you expect that as you move away from the base station, the energy should increase, and you see that it increases in a convex fashion. And the model that we used here is the path loss model. So only transmit energy consumption is modeled here. And so what's interesting is that this shape does not change over time. So in other words, just like there's a stationary node density distribution, we find that there's also a stationary energy distribution over space, which we call the energy potential. It's like a potential function, yes.
So does the shape, is it invariant to the density of nodes?
It is actually not.
Somehow, if you make the system much less dense or much more dense.
Okay. So what would, if it's much less dense, then it would take longer to converge to the same form, but it's invariant to the node density. That's right. Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's not true. I'm sorry. The node density function is invariant to the node density, but this is not, because if I double, for example, the number of nodes, the energy consumption, because we're modeling on transient energy, actually goes down.
Right, but would the shape be the same?
Shape is the same. We actually simulated this for different ends. The shape is the same. That's right, but with lower energies, because transmit powers are being scaled. Yes?
But isn't that conditioned on the fact that your destination is sitting in the middle? No?
Yes, it is.
So therefore, when you say it's invariant, it's somehow... I didn't catch that. I thought it was sort of conditioned on the fact that there is a destination in the middle, right? So
yeah, I mean, invariant. But I'll show you another example later where there's a base station in the middle, but this thing is actually time varying. So it's invariant in the sense that when we graph the average, in other words, from this location, the energy to get from this location to this location, if I measure it many times and average it, it actually converges to a number.
Okay, so your
That's what I
definition
mean.
of invariance is conditioned on the fact that there is a destination.
Yes, that's right. Under this network scenario, yes, that's right. Yeah.
The density plot, right? It looks higher density closer to the center. Is it because of the if your waypoint is outside your network parameters on the bounce back of the wall?
No, there is no bouncing back. In the model that I showed you, you just pick your destination uniformly. There is no bouncing from the walls, but it peaks in the middle because you're crossing the middle area many more times than the edges, right? Because when you just randomly just pick lengths, in the uniformly distributed lengths from two uniformly distributed points, you see that most of the time those lengths will crisscross the middle area. That's the reason that it's peaking in the middle. Yeah. Okay. So actually in this picture, so the main idea is the following, going back to this. So what we would like to do, I'll show this in the second part of the talk, is that we'd like to allow things like energy planning in mobile networks. Currently, it's not doable because things are assumed to change so fast based on individual node mobility models that people think that you cannot really plan how you're going to spend your energy if you're a traveling node. What we would like to do is we'd like to spread this information. This is what we call the average QoS information. We'd like to spread this information somehow to the nodes so that they can make intelligent decisions on how they're going to spend their energy, or for other QoS metrics, how they're going to look at the delay and so on. So, but the question is, how am I going to get this information to the nodes? So in this case, when you're globally collecting it, it's done as follows. It can be done as follows. From this location, when you initiate a beacon packet, you can cumulatively stamp that packet in terms of the cumulative energy consumption that packet has consumed so far to reach the base station. So once it gets there, that can be collected from the packet by the base station, but it's not available to the nodes. In other words, these global energy consumptions can be measured all the way by the base station, initiating the packet here, but it will be very expensive to spread it back to the nodes. So I'd like to be able to construct this, if possible, using only local techniques, okay, without having to go all the way to the base station globally. And so the idea is the following. Every node, when it's in a certain location, can actually measure the energy consumption per packet or per bit to its next top neighbor. Okay, how is the next stop defined? I will explain it. But if it can measure that, then the idea is to integrate these link costs all the way to the base station. Okay, distribute these link costs to the nodes so that each one can integrate it all the way to the base station to construct that energy potential. So let me now explain how these link costs are actually computed. So we use the heuristic scheme based on a joules per bit meter metric. So in this here, this is the source location located in some cell, and this is the direction towards the base station. So the base station is located somewhere here. Whenever we use a certain transmit radius, and whenever we find a neighbor, we measure the energy consumption to reach that neighbor. And we also look at, because we have position information, how much headway it would make towards the destination. So in this case, it would consume this many joules of energy per this many meters towards the base station. So you see that the nodes that are close but do not make headway towards the base station are penalized. And also the nodes that are good in terms of their projection to the base station, but would consume a large energy, are also penalized. We can actually draw a region which is actually similar in a sense to the enclosure work. A region as follows. So if I find the neighbor node 1 here, I can compare in terms of the path loss metric the energy consumption to get here per meter versus the joules per bit meter cost for all the other locations. And we find that if the nodes fall in this shaded region here, then they always have joules per bit meter costs that are higher than this location here. So once you find this neighbor, the only region that you need to search for more neighbors is this region, which is easy to do. So you do not need to look beyond this boundary in order to find the minimum joules per bit meter metric. So locally, you can use this technique to find nodes and minimize the joules per bit meter metric. And every node does this in the cells when they visit different cells. Now, then, I'll describe how. If somehow these link cost measurements can be made available to all the nodes, they can be averaged in a vectorial fashion. So, and if you do that, you'll see that the vectors will point towards the base station. They will point towards that projection. And if you can integrate this to the base station, you should be able to get an approximation of that energy potential. Okay?
So what's creating sort of the kidney shape? Like, why is node 3 outside? Like,
Okay, so node 3 is outside because node 3 is not making a lot of headway towards the base station.
You have a low bound on something like that.
when you say he's not making a lot of headway,
Meaning that the projection here, right here, is small.
D1P vector is very small.
So this is per meter, but it's per meter towards the base station, in the direction of the base station. So in this case, the base station is located somewhere here. So node 3's projection, this is the projection vector. And so that is very small. So that's the reason that even though it's close, it's not really getting me towards the base station.
So that's
Right.
the metric you have down there.
Yes, this is the metric. So this boundary here is after you have found node 1, we compare the energy consumption to get to node 1 versus any other point in this grid. And if other nodes lie beyond this boundary, then it's always suboptimal with respect to node 1.
And source always knows the direction.
Yes, so it has position information and it knows the direction, the location of the destination. Okay. So then let's assume that we have these link costs now. So every node, when it is on a certain cell, it can say, when it asks the question, how much energy does it get to the base station, it can actually use that data to construct a virtual path as follows. It takes this cell, and in its database, it's going to have a vectorial average, okay, for that cell. Let's say it takes it right here. Now, when it reaches here, it looks up from the data that is collected of the link cost, the average link cost to get to the next stop, so on and so forth. And the total energy that's consumed through this virtual path, we should give an approximation of that energy potential. And here are some virtual paths that are constructed this way. And it shows you how the hops were taken sort of based on that average link cost data for different cells. And we graph the percentage error of that link cost estimation based on joules per bit meter plus path integration technique versus the global energy cup shape that I showed in the beginning. And we found that the percentage error peaks around the base station, but away from the base station, it actually goes down to 2.5%. The average over the entire deployment region was about 5%. And why does the error peak around the base station? The reason is that we used a uniform grid when we were collecting these link cost measurements. So around the base station, you have a lot of, you cannot estimate the link very well because the cell size, within the cell, you see that you're actually taking all these hops here, but when we were measuring link costs, we were attributing the link costs to the middle of the cell area. So you get a lot of error around the base station. We actually fixed this problem later by using adaptive cell sizing. We're adapting the cell sizes to the node density using smaller cells around the base station, and then this error is reduced. Okay, but I will not do it in the main part of the talk. But the key point here is that we can actually approximate that potential with a 5% error using the path integration technique. Now, so far, I assumed that all those link cost measurements were somehow available to all the nodes. But there are tons of link cost measurements because every node goes around, makes a measurement in every cell, stamps it with the location, and distributes it to all the other nodes. So how can we distribute the link cost in an efficient way to all the other nodes to construct that potential? So let me show you first how fast this kind of information can spread. So this should remind you of the gossip-based algorithms. So if you have a certain information, and if you send it to your neighbors in this iteration, then if in the next iteration, your neighbors have moved around, and now they send their new information, as well as what they heard from you, to their neighbors. And you see that the measurements, the link cost measurement that A made here, quickly can spread to a lot of the network in a very short time. Okay? So we'll use this technique to spread the link cost measurements based on mobility. Yeah.
You assume that you assume still interference. There's no interference when they communicate.
Exactly. We don't assume any interference. It's just based on the path loss model. And the main
no, but they try not to communicate what somebody else is communicating in their vicinity. Is there something like that?
There is no interference that's modeled here. The energy is modeled purely based on the path loss model, based on the distance. And one way if it's only tiny amounts of data, you can actually do this. But if you have a lot more data, then you have to put in other things like interference and congestion into the model. And that's what we plan to do in the coming years. So this is actually NSF Carrier Award. So we're just being in the first year, but it is down the line, to model those,
Why is there a need to communicate the link cost through a large part of the network?
Yes, because what I'd like to do is that whenever a node asks how much energy does it take to get from my current location to the base station, I want to have an answer. So the only way to have an answer is if I have the link cost measurements, at least for all the things in between as well.
But if the quality is changing, right?
Yes.
Measurements become.
They do not become obsolete because the energy potential is invariant. If the number of nodes stays the same, then the energy potential remains invariant, at least for this mobility model. Does that make sense? Yeah.
But you mentioned that there's no knows the poison of the
Position.
The destination and his own poison, right?
Yes.
You can measure that distance and just have approximating the formula of calculate this cost. Can you have that?
Yeah, well, this is a beginning point. I'll show you more complicated mobility models later. So where there are other things like buildings and attractors in the middle. Then it will not be just based on the position to the base station, So you will need some of the maps, Okay, so we'd like to spread it using this technique. So here is the dissemination algorithm. So first of all, the number of measurements that you're making and hearing from others is exponentially growing, right? So you need to somehow control it. And we use the window size of W to control it. So here, time 0 is the generation time stamp of that measurement. And we only report measurements that were generated either in the current iteration or W iterations into the past, but no longer. So the reason that we do not need these ones is not because they have become obsolete, but because everyone else has heard those measurements. So because of that fast spreading, there should be some W size window beyond which I do not need to look back into the past anymore, because those link costs have been already spread. So I report only W into the past of all the measurements that I know of, all the link cost measurements that I know of. Now, I also, as a node, receive those measurements from my neighbors at each iteration. And then I will do some filtering from my database. I will look up which ones of these I already have, because there's a lot of redundancy, filter those out, and use that filter version, 1, to update the average that I have for that cell, and 2, to update my next report. So put those new measurements into the report where the time window has been shifted by 1. So this is the current time now, looking into the W minus 1 into the past, and repeat. So every node does this for all the measurements that it hears at each iteration. So we graph the percentage error of that dissemination scheme and then using path integration that I described before versus the original cup shape that we showed, which we consider the optimal. And this is the percentage error graphs that we got. So when W is equal to 0, that means that every node is reporting only the currently generated measurements that it's generating, so nothing into the past. And in the beginning, no one has any measurements. So the percentage error, your distance from that original cup shape, is 100% error. But as time passes, this is absolute time, it's decreasing. It's decreasing slowly if you're reporting only the current measurements. But in this case, the overhead is small, and I will characterize the overhead later. Now, if you make the...
so why is it... I'll let you finish on this slide.
OK, so for the when W is equal to 1, I'm reporting the current measurement and 1 into the past. In that case, we see that it's actually converging better. And we increase W, and 5 seems to get a very good performance to us already. So there's so it decreases very fast, and this is about 65 seconds in our simulation. And it then gets very close to this error floor of about 10%. So why is this error floor arising? And there are several reasons. So first of all, the dissemination algorithm, the window size gives you some error. Okay? So increasing the window size W to 6, 7, 8, so on will decrease this error slightly. That's one reason. But then you see that it will not really conquer this error floor. This is coming from the fact that we're using a uniform grid size. So as I showed you in the beginning, there was about 15% error towards the base station, and overall 5% error, right, of the that comes from uniform cell sizing. And that's one reason why you have this error. And the other error is the path integration method. Okay, so actually we can decompose those and look at the percentage of dissemination with respect to path integration. So here, I assume that this is the global path integration without any dissemination. This is with dissemination. So you see that there's a 3 to 4% error that comes from using a finite W. Okay? And there is about a 6% error that comes from using uniform cell sizing. Right? So, but the main point here, which is this graph, is the following. We can decrease the percentage error. In other words, we can get to that global optimal cup shape pretty fast, and we call this thing the spreading period. In other words, this is the time that you require in order for the QoS information to be spread to the entire network. And if the coherence time of that QoS cup, of the energy cup, is much larger than the spreading period, then you have a network which is tractable in terms of QoS. Now, for the random waypoints model, the coherence time is infinite because of the underlying stationary node density, that QoS cup stays that way forever. Okay? So in this case, but that was the first starting point that we used.
So if you make the network more dense, does 10% become 5%?
We didn't actually look at it.
Use a smaller grid, maybe?
Yeah, actually, I will show you the results at the end of the adaptive cell sizing and what happens in that case to the percentage errors.
And does the 100% come because you just sort of arbitrarily make at 0 times you call the constructed 0?
Yeah, so when there's no information available, we assume it's 100% error. Yeah.
So it's not. So when I look at that formula, right?
Yes.
I look and say, oh well, the first time you construct something, now you have a value of E constructed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I look at the ratio of E op minus E constructed over E op, then I think it could be 800.
It can be 800. And actually, initially it is like 800 or something. Initially, it's actually very nice. It's not just 100%.
So are you sort of truncating at some
Yeah, we truncated at 100. Yeah. We did truncate at 100. So the thing, if it's 100 and above, you know, so here 100 means 100 and above, okay?
Okay.
But anything below is valid. So when
you pretty quickly construct the. I mean, it's
yes, it is very quick for W is equal to 5, and the reason that
for W equals, you know, the lime green bar 0.
okay, but let me explain. Actually, we need to look at. I will show the simulation setup. So we need to look at what is 65 seconds. So in other words, how much does the node travel in 65 seconds? That's the key question. And in our case, the sampling iteration is 5 seconds per iteration. And so there are 13 of these, and a node travels roughly 1.3 of one length across the deployment region to get to this point. So in other words, in the random waypoint model, you pick one destination and go there. That's one length, let's say. You do that as one node, and you pick another destination, start going there, complete 30% of the route. By the time that one node does this, so every node is doing the same thing, by the time that you have completed that, this is when you have distributed all the QoS information. Now you have to decide whether that's fast enough or slow enough for your particular application. But this is, so this would be, you know, unacceptable for most cases, because by that time everyone has traveled everywhere, and probably in a real network things would have changed already. So it's important how far the nodes have traveled within the spreading period. Yeah. So another key thing to look at is the overhead, because we're distributing all these link cost measurements. Even though I'm limiting it by size W, theoretically, there are n W measurements floating around in the network. In this case, there are 100 nodes. W is equal to 5 in our case. So 500 measurements are being made per iteration, and they need to be broadcast by every node. That's a theoretical limit. So that's actually very high if you, well, that can be high. But first thing that we did is we collected simulation-wise, what am I spreading? The other thing is it's not clear whether it will settle down to a steady state. Is the overhead settling down to a steady state? So we actually show that it does. So in the beginning of the simulation, no one has any measurements to report. And I will trace the W is equal to 5 case here. Then you start sending your link cost measurements to your neighbors, and very quickly the number of measurements broadcast at each iteration is increasing per iteration. But remarkably, it settles down to a steady state, in this case 75, which is much less than 500. Okay, the theoretical upper bound that one would think of. And it does settle down to a steady state. Of course, the steady state is lower if you're sending out fewer and fewer measurements. Then what we did was we said, well, how many bits is that? So 75 measurements per iteration per node that need to be broadcast to the neighbors. Well, what am I broadcasting? Well, I need to encode node ID. I have 100 nodes, so that's 7 bits to encode. I have 400 cells that I've divided as the grid in my simulation, so that's 9 bits to encode each cell. I need to use timestamps. You have to timestamp the measurements at least within that W and not get confused. So we wrap around after 5 spreading periods, 7 bits. Transmission vector, you have to quantize the angles because, for the direction from each cell. You use 18 angular displacement, 5 bits. Link energy cost, we quantize to 8 bits. So we need 36 bits for each measurement. And each node is broadcasting 75 measurements. So when we multiply, we get 338 bytes on average. Now, if the link speed that you're using is 100 kilobits per second, now crossbow modems are using 250 kilobits per second. So this is a reasonable link speed for terrestrial sensor modems. Then this much overhead can be transmitted in 30 milliseconds. So how large is this? Well, it's 30 milliseconds out of 5 seconds per iteration. So it's actually consuming 0.6% of the overall bandwidth. So with this kind of modems, it's a very small percentage of the bandwidth to send this kind of QoS information. Okay.
So somehow that we call angular displacement in
Yes.
position information.
Yeah, so from each, when I'm making link cost measurements, I record the energy that is consumed to the next neighbor, as well as the direction of the arrow where that neighbor was located. Because then when a node takes the average of that cell, it averages not only the link cost, energy link cost, but also the displacement vectors, so that it lines up towards the base station. So I need to be able to angularly quantize these things and encode it. That's why I put in 5 bits there.
But if the network gets bigger, does one of those terms sort of
Absolutely.
dominate?
Yeah. So for example, here you need to have more bits. Okay, that you need to have more bits. Also, you may need to increase the cell. For a fixed area, if you increase the number of nodes, you may also need to decrease the cell sizes. So you'll also need more bits there. And the spreading period, we didn't look at it how this would be affected. So that's something to look at. But things would change, yes. So far was the main idea. So the main idea was the spreading period versus coherence time. But then we need to move to some more realistic models, and that vary in terms of that have a time-varying energy potential. So here is one model that that is useful. So this is called the modified contraction model. This is from Lou and Helmi's work, Ahmet Helmi's work from 2004. So in this case, there's an attractor. So this attractor can be a lecture hall or mall, and before lecture time, all the students are going towards the lecture hall. So you have this node density that is converging towards the attractor. So the node density is changing in that case. So if the nodes fall in this attractor area. So I'll show you the simulation. Okay, so what is the modified contraction model? When the node is within the attraction area, instead of using the random waypoints model to place its destination around, it draws this rectangle with the attractor, and it executes the random waypoints model within this rectangle. So it picks a destination within here and goes there with a random velocity. And then it does the same thing again and again until it converges to the attractor. So we assume that within attraction areas, all of the nodes move in this fashion. This is our system description for this part. So in our deployment region now, we have 4 attractors, and these are their attractor areas. And this is a 1 kilometer region. These numbers can be scaled. That's what we assume. So here is a cell. So we have 400 cells. Each is 50 meter by 50 meter. There's one base station again in the middle, 100 mobile nodes. In this case, we have a fixed velocity of 10 meters per second. And the sampling interval, in other words, the interval to make measurements is about 5 seconds. So in 5 seconds, a node moves 50 meters here, so which is the size of one cell. So roughly, a node moves about one cell in one iteration. So this is good because if the node were moving negligibly within the cell, then you'd be creating a lot of redundant measurements. So this is a good choice of the sampling interval with respect to the cell size. So in this part, we're going to use a combination of mobility models. So if the node falls outside the attractor areas, then it just picks a destination uniformly from this area. So it executes the original random waypoints model until it falls within an attractor area. Once it falls within the attraction area, it uses the modified contraction model to get to the attractor. So you'll see that in this case, after some time, all of the nodes will have converged to the lecture halls or attractors. And you won't have many nodes remaining outside. Now, in our simulation, we did the following. From 0 seconds to 1,000 seconds, we use the original random waypoints model, so with no attractors. And in this case, the node density approximates that analytical shape that I showed you. Now, this we can call the time invariance mode because we showed that in this case the energy potentials are time invariant. Now, at 1,000 seconds, we turn on the attractors and the nodes start converging towards the attractors. And at 1,500 seconds, all of the nodes are around the attractors. And at this point, we turn off the attractors and go back to the original model, time invariant mode, and we start getting back to this shape. So this is our simulation setup in terms of node densities. The reason we picked this is that we want to have a time invariant mode and a time varying mode. And this is the mode that we'd like to look at now because to see realistically what happens to the energy potential. And that's what we show here. In the time invariance mode, the energy potential is what we expect. It's not as smooth as what I showed you in the beginning because this is average only over 200 iterations. 5 seconds per iteration, so 200. The original one was 10,000 iterations. So, but you still have this energy potential. Now the attractors are turned on, and you get this quite distorted shape. Okay, and here you see that from here to here it's time varying now. You no longer have that cup shape; it's actually changing. But one thing that's important is that the energy it takes from this location to this location. First, it has gone up if you look at the numbers here. And the reason is that there are a lot of very sparse regions now where there are no nodes. All the nodes have converged towards the attractors, so you have to take long hops to the attractor and then to the base station. So the numbers have gone up. But the cup shape, even though distorted, still resembles a cup. And the way to state that precisely is that if you look at the ordering of the cells, and if you ask which cell is better than the other, the ordering we found did not change dramatically compared to this. And that's actually important if you're doing energy planning because it means that even though the energy consumption in magnitude is changing, when you are thinking about what cells you're going to move into, the ordinal numbers are not changing as much. So you can actually do your energy planning even in this case. So here we go back to the energy cup shape again after we turn on the time invariant mode. Yes?
Here after it heads down to the cup shape, you turn on the attractors.
In here, yes.
And therefore you could easily converge again to the cup shape. But if in the beginning all the nodes were random and you had turned on the attractors,
yes.
would it be a difference?
Yeah, so if we turn on the attractors, we would probably get a shape that starts looking like this. Basically, what's happening from this point to this point is that some of the nodes are staying outside the attraction areas, right?
Most of them have condensed already in the middle, and when you...
Yes, that's right. So I think that my guess is that the behavior will be similar to this. The end picture will be similar to this. But here we sort of truncate and go back to the time invariant mode. If we stayed in that mode forever, then it doesn't become as useful as simulation for us. Because everyone now is very concentrated on the attractors, and again, things aren't very changing. We're really interested in the mode where that change occurs. That's why we went from here to here. You see what I'm saying? So we want to look at, create a time varying potential. After everyone has converged the attractors, it's again time invariant. But we'd like to capture this transient range.
So Volkan,
yes.
You put your 4 attractors and put them in the 4 corners
that's symmetric.
of the box.
Yes.
You have a symmetric thing here, but you push the attractors right out to the corner so that you never actually, So you
in that case,
so then it seems like once most of the people are attracted, your bowl at the bottom should just be
again time invariant.
D to the alpha bowl that says I'm forced to go direct because there's probably no one in the bowl to help me.
That's right. Okay. That's what's going to happen.
What would happen.
Yeah, that's what will happen. But for our simulation purposes, that's not a very useful scenario because we'd like in this case everyone will see the same energy consumption, right? To jump for everyone will have to go through the long links. You'll be looking at how much energy it takes to get from the boundary, basically, to the middle. Yeah. But what I'm trying to do here is look at, as the energy potential is changing in the transient regime, what's happening. So I wanted to get that information, and that information happens as you are traveling from here to here. Yeah, so that's...
On the other hand, it's not clear what's the... I mean, it just depends on what physical circumstance you imagine these nodes, what it represents to decide what the important thing is.
That's right. So in this case, what I wanted to do was I wanted to look at a case where the energy potential is time varying. So the key thing here that I wanted to simulate is that the node density is changing. So in the original one, right, the waypoint model, node density stayed the same, that stationary shape. Okay, that's great. I got those results. But when it's varying, what's going to happen? Now, this may not be a very realistic scenario, but if we were looking at more realistic models, then this is the kind of thing that we would look at. In the transient regimes, as node densities are changing, what is happening to the energy consumption?
So I can't sort of figure out how big your grid is, but typically how many hops was it to go to the base, to the center?
Yes. So let me
sort of, like I would have expected, right? When people had clustered at the the bottom right hand corner where the attractors that attracted most everyone, and the bold is mostly showing the cost of direct signaling to the collector. Right? I would have thought, oh, maybe if the powers would be a lot higher. Right?
Yes, powers would be a lot higher. That's true.
You're only showing powers that are like 2 dB or 1 dB higher, not 10 dB higher. Like if I read your graphs right.
Oh, I see your point.
You're not seeing a factor of 10 in the power cost from attraction. I think it went 0.1 to 0.05 to 0.1 or something.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about it. First, let me answer this question. So how many hops? Actually, this is quite indicative of the actual number of hops. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, 8, about 8 to 10. That's what we found.
You're doing alpha propagation exponent.
Yes, that's the model that we use.
So maybe my brain is thinking, like maybe with 2, those are the right numbers. I'm sure they are, right? But
what?
If my brain is thinking,
yeah,
3 or
no,
4,
but okay.
Then the variation would be a lot bigger, right?
Yeah, I agree that because of the, we'll go back and check the simulations too.
The lots of short hops get bigger, right?
That's right. So if I replace this one by a very long hop, which is what happens there, but I believe what happens is the following: not all nodes are in the attractor areas. So now I actually remember this from the simulations. Let me go back to that slide. So actually here it looks like everyone is there.
So you're saying that's not really
That's not the case. There are actually some guys still wandering around. And if I remember correctly, it's about 15% or so still wandering around. But that's what I remember. Well, let's see. In this case, it is the case. And yeah, I have to check the simulations. Yeah, I see your point. You're saying is not too different from that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll look at the simulation code again.
So if you you're saying that now you had 100% nodes helping you to get to the sink. Now you have 15% only.
That's right.
So maybe 15% is still pretty good. Like
yeah, it is. Yeah.
To a little while longer and got to 99% of people are attracted, then maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Infinite bandwidth.
So continue from here. Now what we did was for the time varying case, we need to think about how we're going to graph the percentage error, because originally we averaged everything because everything was time invariant. But here, things actually become obsolete. So to go from this part of the simulation, this part, well, the energy potential is actually changing. So I need to think about how much into the past I will look. And this S here is the number of measurements at each cell that I use into the past in order to compute my average. Okay? And when we use only one measurement into the past, that's the blue line, and this is 50 measurements into the past. The original graphs that I showed you the first one that I showed, the cup shape, uses all the measurements into the past, right? 10,000 runs. So 50 is in between number. So the key thing here is the following. For the time invariance modes, we see that looking back into the past produces an error that is about 17%, which is of course higher than that 10% floor that we found in the first case, because we are actually not looking all the way into the past, but it is better than looking only one into the past. When we turn on the time varying mode, we see that the blue curve actually starts overtaking the red one, which means that in the time varying mode, it may make sense to actually use only the very recent measurements. And when you go back to the time invariance mode, you see that the looking back into the past starts varying more. So the implication of this is that for real networks, we need to have some mechanism to figure out how fast the node densities or related QoS metrics are changing if we are going to apply this. Yeah. Okay, so how are we doing in terms of time? Is this
Well, maybe another
15 minutes?
45.
Okay. Okay, so another 15 minutes. So this is the second part of the talk, but I'll just give a summary of this, not going to as much detail as the first part. And what we wanted to do was we asked the question, well, how can we use these QoS potentials or energy potentials to solve application problems? So one application, as I mentioned before, is energy planning, and this is very difficult currently in mobile networks. So if I have a mobile node that knows its near future trajectory, so it knows how it will travel, in addition, then it also has a delay deadline. So by a certain delay deadline, it needs to transmit a certain number of bits to the base station with minimum energy. Okay. Now, if you did not have an energy map, you would not know when to transmit. So the current protocols, for example, just try to send right away. But that may not be the best thing. So given this kind of energy map, if this is my delay constraint here, then I can say, well, it looks like this is the best point to send to the collection site, and I will wait until I get to this point to send there. So if you're using sort of a bits per joule kind of metric. If you're interested in the data rate, the average data rate, maximize the average data rate to send that data, then you can do sort of trajectory-based water filling. So along this trajectory, you can water fill your energy such that you send high data rates as you're approaching the collection site, and then low data rates as when you're away from the collection site. Now, this is, of course, in your paper too. You wrote papers on cellular networks. As you get close to the base station, you should transmit your data, and so on. So absolutely, we use that work. And the main novel part here is that we want to see, we're using this energy map construction that comes from mobility. So that's the novel part. So it's not just based on position, but it's actually based on the energy map that we constructed. So one of the things that we did was we collected, so far in the first part of the talk, I only talked about averages. But what's the distribution around that average? And we actually found a roughly, Gaussian-looking distribution around the average. So this is the average that we had. I was showing you pictures of only the average before. But there is a pretty tight distribution around that average, as shown here. And so if you're using some kind of energy allocation scheme, this is an optimization problem now. So I have a certain trajectory. So this is the current location, and this is my trajectory. And these are the different, let's say, iterations. We use 5-second intervals. You can use different. So I will go through certain stages until I reach the delay deadline. I'd like to allocate. I have a certain fixed number of bits, and I want to send those bits to the base station with a minimum energy such that I meet this delay deadline. And at each stage, basically, I have that distribution. Through the link costs, I can compute that distribution that I showed you that looks Gaussian. And one of the ways to solve this problem is to quantize it. with certain thresholds. So I can say with respect to the average for that cell, this is for a particular cell, I can be in a bad state with high energy cost, in a good state, or medium state. So each of these stages would have 3 states, 3 possible channel states, where the channel here is the end-to-end energy consumption. And I'll skip the math and just show the graph here. So we can set up a trellis diagram. The depth of the trellis here is the number of stages until the delay deadline. The number of the states here are the quantized states of that distribution for each cell. And let me explain how these are computed. First of all, a node knows its trajectory. So on that trajectory, it has those dots that I showed you, okay, in the previous slide. Now, so it knows what cells it will land in. So this last cell here, let me show. So this last cell here is the I know what cell is going to hand in, so I know the distribution here. So I will use the states that correspond to the link cost computed for this cell, and similarly for this cell, and so on. So this is the last cell in that picture. And I can get this from the link costs, computing the Gaussian looking distribution. Similarly for this cell, similarly for this cell, my trajectory. Now then I do an optimization. So it works as follows. Let's say that my delay deadline is this one. Then what I need to compare is the expected energy cost that I will incur if I wait one more stage to send my bits. Okay. Versus the energy cost that I would incur if I sent all of those bits at that stage. So I need to keep track of basically the news here that reflect the average costs. And you see that this is decreasing going this way. So as you're approaching the delay deadline, you are more pressured to send your data. But if the delay deadline is very, very far away, and if you're in a medium state, then you shouldn't be sending your data at this point. You can afford to wait. But if the deadline is approaching, then a medium state starts looking good, and you start sending your data.
You follow a trajectory, you know the trajectory.
Yes.
You know the energy costs from each location.
Yes.
Of the trajectory.
Yes.
And the problem is you have a certain number of bits you want to
send
within a certain deadline.
Yes, that's right. I should have shown this.
You end up solving kind of a
dynamic program, yes. And exactly. Actually, this is the program. So we're trying to minimize the energy consumption. So the energy consumption this is the current bits, number of bits that I sent in the current iteration, in the current stage. And this is the expected value of the energy of the bits of the energy that it would take me if I wait more stages. So this is
your assumption, though, is that the energy in any particular stage is based on this expected value, based on sort of the rest of the network doing some kind of a random thing.
Actually, it's based on that energy map that we constructed. Okay. So for each cell, I know the distribution of energy to get from that cell to the base station. It's based on that distribution. That's right. But one simplification that occurs here is that this problem actually can be solved only on the vertices of the feasible region. And it turns out that that's what the trellis diagram does, actually. It turns out that the optimal solution sends all the packets at one stage. So it doesn't partition it partially into different stages. What it does is compare the expected value of the current stage versus the cost that it's seen for that cell, the average cost. If the expected value of waiting, expected cost of waiting, the energy that it would consume if you wait, is larger than the current one, then you should send it currently. If it's smaller, then you should wait. Yeah.
Okay. So do you assume that your total number of bits is enough for your one shot to transmit, or it has to be cast multiple shots?
Say that again.
So I'm saying that how much is your total bits? Can you send it at one shot? Just the nearest bits. I just send it at once. I will finish all my transmission, or I have a very long transmission so that
Yeah, here I don't remember the exact number of bits, but it's actually a small number of bits. So if you had a very large number of bits and you hit the actual sort of transmission speeds coming out, it's not happening here. So we're dealing with small amounts of data. That's right.
Okay. When you assume that you have the same speed and the same rate of transmission no matter which cell you are?
That's right. That's right.
So you don't consider if you are near, you may have a larger bit rate?
We don't. And actually, the kind of model that we have here is that, for example, you're using the same modem, 100 kilobits per second modem, and that's a given. So we're not changing that. We're not doing rate adaptive transmission here. So I'll skip some stuff and just show these results. So one thing at the end, what we did was compare the energy map based methods, so optimizing using the energy map method versus the optimal planning, and this we assume has access to all of the information, the end-to-end energy information. Okay, and we found that our optimization scheme with energy maps, using energy maps, performs within 10% of error. And this we were very surprised at because this seemed very small, because this has basically access to the actual energy consumption instantaneously that would be observed, whereas we are using estimation-based method basically, looking only one measurement into the past, and we're getting this kind of error. And we thought about it, and the main reason that we're able to get this is because even when you're converging towards the attractors, the energy cup shape remains ordinal-wise the same. So if a certain cell, let's say this is the deployment region, and that's the base station over there, this cell in the time invariance model had a certain numbering in terms of the energy consumption of the base station. When things are becoming worse and the sparse areas are forming, in this case, this cell is still rank-wise in a good position compared to cells over here, because they're seeing the same sparse areas there. So because that ranking of the cells in terms of ranking did not change, the trellis-based optimization method actually gives good performance. So you're able to get this kind of error. So what I'd like to leave you with is this slide. It's something also to think about. So for point-to-point link concepts, we have coherence time of the channel. And if this is much larger than the symbol duration, then we can track this channel. So basically, the analogous network concept is that this coherence time that we defined of QS metrics, if it's much larger than the spreading period, then we can actually hope to track the network. And this is, I think that this will make the mobile networks much more tractable than commonly believed, because common algorithms use individual node mobility, not coherence time. That's, yes.